Hi guys, I'm Monk to Dial It Up, and today we are talking about objects. So we're going to start off with objects are little cardboard tokens that you add into your force. Now each force that you make, each player that comes to the board will bring 3 objects with them. There are a couple of different types of objects. There's the standard objects, special objects, which include relics and equipment. Now first we're going to go over standard objects. Standard objects are the ones that you'll get in starter kits and look like these. There are 4 different types of standard objects. There's an ultralight, which is by the white ring, a light, which is the yellow ring, a heavy, which is the red ring, and an ultra heavy, which is the purple ring. When you're building your force and you have your 3 tokens, object tokens, you can have up to 3. So you can include 0, 1, 2, or 3. When you include 1, you can include any type of object. So that will include a heavy, which also includes ultra heavy, a light, which includes ultralight, an immobile, which is by a blue ring, and those are generally special objects or relics. When you include 2 objects, you get to a point where you have to do, they can't be the same. So if you started with a heavy, you have to do a light or an immobile. If you started with a light, you have to do a heavy or immobile. Then when you get to 3, you can have any mixture of 3, but 2 of them have to be a heavy or light. Now that can include ultra heavy or ultra light. So within your mixture, it is possible to have 2 ultra heavies and an ultra light to make up your 3 objects. Now these don't cost anything, these are just an added thing when building your force. When you're placing them on the map, they can be placed anywhere on the map in clear terrain. Now there are certain maps that are almost exclusively water. Those have now been errated to allow you to place objects, because previously you couldn't place objects in water terrain. But those are to those specific maps. So when you're placing them on, they can be anywhere except within the starting area, which is the purple lines, as long as they're on clear terrain. They don't have to be a certain amount away from your starting area, they can just be anywhere. When the objects are on the board, they are considered hindering terrain, except for the ultralight, but we'll talk about that when we specifically talk about the ultralight. Objects, much like blocking terrain, can be destroyed, and they're actually destroyed the same way that you would destroy blocking terrain, where you would give a character an action to make either a close combat or a ranged combat attack, and as long as they are dealing 3 damage, the object is destroyed. Once the object is destroyed, it is removed from the game, and no hindering terrain token is placed in its place like you would when destroying blocking terrain. The next part with objects is using them in attacks. Now, typically objects are only picked up when a character has super strength or has a special power that allows them to pick up objects. So to pick up an object, when you are given a move action, or when you move, because you don't actually have to be specifically given the move action, when you move a character, as long as you move either through a square that the object occupies or is adjacent to, you can pick it up. However, if getting to the object means that you would become based with a character and you don't ignore characters, then you can't pick up the object if they are adjacent to it or they're under it, because coming into base and base contact with them would happen before you are able to pick up the object. And they actually just recently added in the fact that you can now put down objects once you pick them up. So if you pick up an object on a different move, you can place it. You can either pick up an object or put an object down, but within the same movement, you can't pick it up and then put it down. So when you are holding an object after you have managed to pick it up, it is considered to occupy the same square as your character, but it can't be targeted and it can't be destroyed when it's held. And the only time it's going to drop is either if that character is KO'd or that character loses the ability to carry the object. So if they take damage and they no longer are showing super strength. When an object is dropped, it's going to drop into the square that the character last occupied or is occupied if they lose the ability to carry that object. If there's already an object in that square and an object has to be dropped, it actually just gets removed from the game rather than going into an adjacent square or anything or doubling up on that square. If there's already an object, that object that's going to get dropped is removed from the game. So the next thing that you can do with standard objects is using them in attacks. Now they can be used either in range combat attacks or close combat attacks. When you're making a close combat attack while you're holding an object, you will actually increase your damage based on which object you're holding. So when you're holding a light object, you get +1 to the damage. It's your damage value, not your damage dealt, so that will be subject to rule of 3. When you are holding a red heavy object, it is +2 to your damage. And when you're holding the ultra heavy object, that's +3 to your damage. And the ultra light, the white ring ones, actually can't be used in close combat attacks. You can still hold it, and when you're making a close combat attack, you just won't use the object. Once an object is used in a close combat attack, it is then removed from the game. Now this is whether or not it is a successful hit, it's still removed from the game. Once you make that attack, it'll be removed from the game. So say a character has super senses, or you just plain don't succeed, it's going to remove the object. The one little thing on that is that if the character managed to roll shape change, that negates the attack from ever happening. So if you don't have another target in a place where you can attack, you still keep your object because the attack never happened. When you are attacking with range, there's actually different rules based on what object you're using, and that is the ultra heavies can't be thrown. They're too heavy, so you don't have to worry about that. The heavies are thrown 4 squares and then do, is it the same amount of damage? And they deal 3 damage while thrown, and the lights can be thrown 6 squares and they deal 2 damage. Now the ultralights, while they can't be used in a close combat attack, can be used in a range combat attack, and they can be thrown 8 squares, dealing 1 damage. And you would just do this like any other range combat attack, where as long as you have range and line of fire, make an attack roll, deal the object damage. Now there are specific rules based on the ultra heavies and the ultra lights. The ultra heavies can only be picked up by characters that are 100 points or more. And they can't be used in range combat attack. Already mentioned that. They also can't be moved by telekinesis, and when you're trying to destroy an ultra heavy, you have to deal 4 damage to it instead of 3 damage like you would with a regular standard object. And then the ultra lights, any character can pick them up. They don't have to have super strength, but then they can't be used in close combat. They can only be used in range combat, and they aren't considered hindering terrain when they're on the board. So they're not going to add bonuses to your defense, and you can't hide in them for stealth, and they're not going to hinder your movement when you're moving around the board. The other thing to note is characters who have special powers that call out standard heavy or standard light objects, they are specifically talking about just the red and yellow. Even though ultra lights and ultra heavies are considered light and heavies, for the purposes of characters' special powers, they're not, if that makes any sense. When they say specifically standard light or standard heavy, it's the yellow or the reds, not the purple and the whites. So the next section of objects, type of objects that are in the game, are special objects. And they are denoted by, let me make sure I got the right card coming out here. I'm so unprepared. I'm never like this. It's such a Jason thing for me to do. They are denoted by the gear symbol. There. The gear symbol that's on the card. And those are special objects. Now, special objects, you can have as many special objects on your force as you have regular object. Now, they're going to go by the standard object rules when you do your 3, is that you have to have a light. So these old kryptonite, these golden age kryptonite ones are light. You have to have a light, a heavy, and then whichever one you'd like. So you can have 2 kryptonite and say a Hulkbuster piece, because those are heavy special objects. Or you can have a Hulkbuster piece, a kryptonite, and a relic, or a special object that's got the blue ring around it, which is an immobile special object. Now, immobile objects, they are done by the blue ring. They cannot be moved, they cannot be picked up, and they cannot be a target of telekinesis. So once they are placed, they are going to be there. Most of the time they have special rules on them, and you just follow what's written on the card to say what kind of effects that they are going to have on the game. When you're adding special objects to your force, there are most times that they have a point cost, and those are added into your force. When you're calculating the total of your force, you're just adding in, you have to pay the points to put that special object on your team. When you're placing them on the board, special objects, be rather regular special objects, equipment, or relics, they have to be placed 5 squares away from your starting area. Or any starting area? Any starting area. So 5 squares away from any purple outlined squares on the map. Once they are on the board, they're going to follow any other rules. So unless the object says it can't be destroyed, it's going to follow the destruction rules. They are considered to be objects on the board, so they're going to cause hindering terrain bonuses or stop you if you move on to them. The next special object is the relics. So the relics are, so I've got the Legion ring here, and they are denoted by an actual, they'll say on the top of their card, relic. And they will have a roll or a set of numbers next to relic there. That is denoted for the relic roll. Now, characters, once they enter a square with a relic, they may be given a power action to make a relic roll. That relic roll is just a single d6. Once you roll it, if the result is within that range of numbers on the card, then you can pick up that object and assign it to your character. So relics are immobile objects that can't be picked up or held by super strength, but if you succeed in the relic roll, they can be assigned to your character, which will remove them from the board, put them on your character card. Now, they do say character card just for ease of wording. If you happen to be playing with really old Heroclix that didn't have cards, you can still assign relics to them. They can still roll for it and bring it onto their character. They just say character card because it's an easy way to say that it's assigned to that character. So you put it off to the sideline or sideboard. Now that character can use the special abilities that that relic grants them. Once a character is KO'd, if they are assigned a relic, that relic is going to drop into the square that they last occupied. And if it can't drop into that square, if there's another object there, then it'll just go into the next available adjacent square. And then from there, it can be picked up again. Much like other special objects, relics will have a point cost, and then that'll be how much you have to pay to add it to your force. Now, special objects and relics are objects on the board, much like standard objects, that your opponent can use as well. So while they're likely going to be on your side of the board, if your opponent does get there and they land on it, they can be affected by and benefit from the special rules of a special object or a relic. The final ruling on relics, and unfortunately this is not listed under relics, it's listed under resources. If you have a relic on your force, you cannot have a resource, and vice versa. If you have a resource on your force, you cannot have a relic. Also, just reiterating, as I mentioned earlier, with only being able to have, like when you have a heavy, a light, and a mobile, relics are immobiles. You can only have one relic on your force. Even if you had like 2 standard immobile special objects, I don't know if they actually do too many of the blue ringed special objects, you can only have one relic on your force, but you can't have a resource. And I also want to enforce the fact that while I said you can't have a relic and a resource, you also can't have a special object and a resource. So that whole section of special objects, if it has a gear symbol and you're adding it to your force, you cannot also add a resource. If you have a resource, you cannot add something with a gear symbol. But because this is Heroclix, there are special powers or traits that get around that. So first I'm going to talk about characters like Bookworm. Now he is actually not an exception to the rule, but he's more of know what you're looking for. Now Bookworm has a trait that allows him to start the game with his bookcase, which is a special object, that is at no cost to your force. So he can add it in without paying its special object core cost, but it's still part of your force, and that means while you're not paying for it, it's still going to take up one of your object slots, and it's still going to be considered a special object on your team, so you won't be able to add a resource. However, characters like Emerald Empress, who comes in with her Emerald Eye of Ekron, it is worded, it does not count towards your force. Now the 7 deadly sins, they do that as well. They bring in their relic at no cost to your force, which means that when you're doing your force construction and checking all of your rules for legality, you're not counting this guy. He's just not even part of the equation. So that means you can either add in another relic or extra special objects or a resource. Because this isn't counting towards your force, you're saying, I don't care about that rule. And then there's characters like Mordrew. Now Mordrew, once the game has started, he has a power that allows him to bring relics into the game from outside of the game. Because it's coming from outside of the game and the game has started, this allows Mordrew and characters like him to get around the relic and resource rules that only is checked during force construction. The one final thing that I do want to talk about with special objects, as I mentioned earlier, with them having a point cost and adding to your force also means that they will get scored. So special objects on your team, they will get scored when they are removed from the game. Now, not all of them have a condition that removes them from the game. So if they were not removed from the game and they are left on the board, if your entire team is wiped, they get scored. But if they're left on the board and there's still figures left on the board, so say you went to time, they're not going to get scored. With relics, there are 2 ways that they get scored. If your opponent picks up your relic and ends the game with it still assigned to its character, it will score it. And if you get completely wiped, they score for your relics. Whether they were picked up or not, a complete wipe, they get those points. Now the final bit of objects are equipment. These just recently showed up with the Hulkbuster and Pim Particles. Unfortunately, we don't have rules for them yet. So while there have been a couple of rulings around where we know that equipment can only be used by your characters, equipment is KO'd according to the instructions on their cards, they are special objects, and they are equipped to characters, not assigned to characters, it's not enough comprehensively for me to actually give you guys a tutorial on what equipment is. However, I promise that once we get a section in the rulebook for equipment or the player's guide and we have a full explanation as to what they do, I will do another episode for you guys explaining how equipment works. But until then, we only have a few rules here and there as to what these things do for our force. Alright, so that was objects. And hopefully that was a good explanation for you guys. I know a lot of newer players have been looking over what objects and special objects do for you, especially with the new introduction. We're seeing more special objects come out. If there's anything you think I didn't go over, comments, questions, concern, down below, and we'll see you guys next time for another episode of Dada.
Made with Clix is brought to you by Majestic's Heroclix sales down in Costa Mesa, California. Right now, they're in the middle of storefront change. In the meantime, don't forget to check out their eBay store. If you check the link down below, they always have great Heroclix stuff at fantastic prices, and they'll ship just about anywhere.